Hello. I have been hyping up this talk to about half the room for the past however many days, and I really hope you like it. This is the calendar invite just said, effective communication, and then there's this weird subtitle here: language games, actor networks, and you. And there's going to be a lot of dashboards because this talk is about communication, right? But I'm going to go into a different sort of angle than you might expect, right? And yeah, let's get started. But first, there's a small intermission that I want to make. April is Autism Acceptance Month, and by a huge coincidence, like April 2nd is Autism Acceptance Day, and that also happens to be my birthday, right? And I'm bringing this up because I am autistic. I was diagnosed September last year, and it's very mild, but I was diagnosed. I can feel the impact in my life, but I couldn't quite tell what was going on for most of it. And now that I've figured it out, it's been great. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here are things that I learned, knowingly or not, that help me navigate all these sorts of tricky social situations that to some people are obvious, right? Sometimes I'm going to say a lot of obvious things in this talk, but also there's the one of the Python mantras or whatever is like explicit is better than implicit. So this is another title for this talk would be like social interactions made explicit, but not in that way. Anyway, all right, and yeah, as for the obvious things, let's start with the first obvious statement here. The world is a big place, right? It's like breaking news, right? The world's a big place. And people communicate differently, which is also like, wow, that's impressive. Well, but what I want to do here is like go really deep into the obvious, because the obvious is sometimes the easiest thing to miss, right? Because, well, we think, okay, the world's a big place, people communicate differently, but we don't stop to think about what that means. And I want to talk about some of the values here at Platform first, right? We have clarity, we have empathy, we have timeliness. These are important sort of cornerstones of communication that we're going to talk about here as well. And also how these relate as well to the platform values like positive impact. We measure our success on how we improve our customers' lives and their individual businesses. We're fair not only to our team members, but also to our clients and partners. We communicate truthfully with facts, not assumptions. This second part here, we communicate truthfully with facts and not assumptions. This also goes into the explicit, not implicit thing. And we aim for the stars. We want to tackle and solve hard problems with a sense of urgency and bias toward action, one step at a time. So let's go one step at a time and go into the wild world of the obvious. Our main topics here are what are language games and what are actor networks and how can understanding them help you, and some other analyses in between, right? Okay, so I copied Wikipedia's introduction here because it's good enough for our purposes. What's a language game? A language game is a philosophical concept developed by Ludwig Wittgenstein, referring to simple examples of language use and the actions into which the language is woven. Right? He argued that a word or even a sentence has meaning only as a result of the rule of the game being played. Depending on the context, for example, the occurrence water could be an order, right? An answer to a question or some other form of communication. communication. It could be a request, it could be an answer to a trivia game, it could be all sorts of things, but it's the same word every time. But yeah, one other thing we're looking at here, we must consider, right, all language is context bound. The implication of language games is this: all language is context bound, and language games are an elegant framework for us to understand the fact that everything, absolutely everything, is context bound. And communication must be compressed, translated, and decompressed through the medium of language. And sometimes information gets lost in the middle. Nick and I learned this lesson very thoroughly yesterday when we were trying to recover a hard drive from a computer, right? We were compressing, decompressing stuff, and trying to transmit it, and a bunch of things got lost in the way. Eventually, we gave up, and things got lost in the middle. So this is like a very this is like a thing that you will notice that also applies to language as well. And well, this is like, if you start to think about it, okay, it's obvious, right? There are misunderstandings all the time. Things get lost. It's okay, but yeah, that's implicit. That's an implicit thing. That's the thing that, well, I didn't learn myself. I didn't realize myself up until very recently when I worked it out. Like, oh, misunderstandings happen. Like, even though I lived through misunderstandings and I was misunderstood and I misunderstood others, it still wasn't enough of a step for me to think, okay, misunderstandings happen, that's just a part of life, But understanding language games has helped me navigate through these difficult situations because it gave me a tool to think, right? If I'm in a situation, I think, okay, what language game are we playing right now? So I can try to navigate better, so I can, because, there are subtle things that happen, right? So let's look at an example to illustrate what I mean. Luckily, today's a nice day outside. Yesterday, this talk wouldn't have worked. It's a nice day outside. The sun's shining, birds are chirping, and then you get an alert. It's a customer call request, and it's a big sale, right? And the site just went down. Oh, and this is how I feel every time that I get that sound of option alerting, and 15 minutes to respond to the call, and while on call, and we were just talking about multi-region active, which is 15 minutes to solve it. So, this hamster here, boy, gets eaten for a ride. Well, getting into calls, I didn't introduce myself, right? I'm Luis. Hello. I'm an elite support engineer here. And, getting into calls is part of my job, right? It's expected. It's like a part of my role. It's fine. And I always need to take a breather every single time, no matter like the situation. Getting into calls will always make me nervous, right? Because, well, even though we're expected, like that things fail, things get lost, things break. We know all of this, but sometimes. I don't know about y'all, but I forget. In the middle of the day, I'm just doing like a domain addition, and I'm like, oh wow, isn't this nice? It's just, adding a line to a file and pushing, and everything works great. Beautiful. The miracle of technology, right? But sometimes things break, and sometimes they break a lot, and sometimes they break a lot, and, well, sometimes people want to know what's up, and that's what they call us, right? And they are interesting experiences, right? Sometimes they're ahead of a big launch, getting the game plan on. We're going to launch at such and such date. Let's make sure everything's ready, etc. That's the sort of call that the TAM team will do, the CSMs will do, right? Not usually us. Sometimes they're coming in during a big outage, which is our job, right? And it's a box of surprises, we never know what to expect, really. Sometimes, I've gotten some calls where I was expecting it to be like a huge deal, and the customer was the most nicest, most understanding person ever. And sometimes I think it's going to be a small deal, and then Every 5 seconds they're asking, what are you doing? Are you fixing the site? Is it back up yet? Like literally, this sort of thing has happened, not just with me, but you know, I know Stephanie has dealt with some of it, I know Weston has dealt with some of it, like, it happens. Well, and this is where I want to bring back to language games thing, right? Also, are interesting experiences because they can look a certain way. They sometimes look like they're about solving the technical issue at hand as quickly as possible. All hands on deck, you know? When we join calls, it's not just us. A member of the Magento support team joins as well. 1 or 2 members. Sometimes casting support gets involved. Sometimes, you know, one of your own vendors gets involved. Like sometimes, you know, they'll call, becomes like a 15-person call, you know, solving the greatest outage of the time, you know. Yeah, sometimes they look like they're about that. And this is certainly the case most of the time, right? Because they are. We expect to be playing then the solving the technical issue language game. We optimize our communication to be technically dense. We say, okay, we're recovering MySQL right now. You know, the Galera cluster has come back up at such and such time. You know, we reduce the query cache size or whatever. You know, these things are all part of the language that we use, right? And I mean, how many of you understand all of this that I just said? Like, not a lot of you. Like, there's a lot of people who don't know what's up, you know? And sometimes the call is with people who know what's up and want to know what's up, and they want to know all these details, right? But sometimes they're a different way, right? Sometimes they just want to have a call to make sure that we're looking at their issues. Nothing else. They just want to make sure that there is a human on the other side, you know, living, breathing, that is responding to their issue and, you know, reassuring them. So sometimes the call is about playing to reassuring the customer language game, right? And recognizing which is which when, like that's just a small example because, like I said, this is one example, but we play language games all day, every day long. Right now, I'm trying to impress an audience language game. Right? I'm using language that the cadence that I usually wouldn't use, right? I don't speak like this usually, but sometimes I gotta put on this stage persona, right, and try to give a nice presentation. Okay, so, yeah, let's delve a bit deeper, because that's just a philosophical thing. But for this part, I also need to do another big reveal that not a lot of people know. Unfortunately, I gave some spoilers earlier today because I can't contain myself. But I'm still going to university, right? And I graduate next year, April next year. And I'm studying social sciences, right? And I'm going to become an anthropologist. And a lot of people know somewhat what a sociologist is, a lot of people know somewhat what a political scientist is, but not a lot of people know what an anthropologist is. Anthropologists study culture, like we had a culture talk earlier today, and we're going to have a cultural workshop right after this, so it's all lined up together very nicely. Yeah,
do you have a favorite anthropologist?
Oh yeah. You're going to find out like the next slide. Oh yeah, I do. So like, the way I like to describe it, anthropology, right? When you get to a certain level of expertise in anthropology, I came up with this, and some other people have come up with this beautiful formulation, right? Anthropology is the study of things humans do, right? That's simple enough. That's broad, but yeah, that's the point. Like, humans do a lot of things, and what matters in anthropology is like the way we study it, etc., right? But after a certain point, you also learn what we're going to learn here in the next slide, that anthropology is not just the study of things humans do, it's also the study of things non-humans do, right? And that's another wholly broad thing, right? Because you're all looking at me in the stage here, right? In the stage, I'm the only human. right now. What's non-human in this stage? Everything else. Everything else is non-human, right? And I want to invite you to consider this for a moment, because like I said, the obvious is sometimes the easiest to miss. All of this that you're typing on right now, or drinking your water, etc., all of this was human design. All of it. And it carries forward, like all the human things, or the non-human things we're using here in this room at the moment, right? They all carry the intentionality of their designer, right? So that's the sort of thing that we're going to bring together with us here, because we're going to dive, I said a bit deeper, but it's going to be a lot deeper. And I want to talk about Bruno Latour, my favorite anthropologist.
Not the same, but coincidence.
Right? So, what are actor networks? So, Wikipedia's introduction again. Actor network theory is a theoretical and methodological approach to social theory where everything in the social and natural worlds exists in constantly shifting networks of relationships. I mean, that's okay formulation, right? It posits that nothing exists outside those relationships, and then you go, whoa. Have you ever heard of physics, buddy? Like, black holes and such? I mean, we'll get there. All the factors involved in the social situation are on the same level, and thus there are no external social forces beyond what and how the network participants interact at present. Thus, objects, ideas, processes, and any other relevant factors are seen as just as important in creating social situations as humans. So, yeah, Bruno Latour, he has a series of books that he wrote all about this, and one of which I finished recently, right? It's called "We Have Never Been Modern." It's a wild ride, but yeah, He's also an anthropologist, but he's a philosopher, a sociologist, and he studies, his area of work was a thing called science and technology studies. So he was doing the relatively new thing in anthropology was, whereas anthropology was about studying other people's cultures, right? And historically, this would be native people's cultures, or, cultures in remote countries, based on, whoever, again, it's always a matter of comparison, right? But he did, the contemporary thing is let's use anthropology to study ourselves, our technology, our culture, right? And that's the sort of thing where it has really been useful to me, and what I want to share with you here. Yeah, the thing is, we're going to be looking here at the social aspects of interactions, right? But also the technical aspects, the cultural aspects, and the key part of all this, of Latour's work, right, in my interpretation at least, is that you cannot split these apart. It's all a package deal. You can't just split social and technical apart. There is too much technical in the social and too much social in the technical for you to split them apart, right? So this is the sort of, if that's the phrase, if there's one phrase that you will remember from this talk, I want that to be it, right? And yeah, so let's go back over the previous example a bit. Interactions are complicated experiences. They look a certain way. When talking to a customer, with a teammate, or a member of another team, which I'm very happy that there's a lot of people from a lot of different teams here, it seems like it's just a regular conversation, right? And this certainly is the case most of the time. I mean, sometimes they're just making small talk, right? We expect sometimes them to be doing our job the next day. We're just asking, hey, what about that incident? What about that, what report you filled? What about that report or whatever, But sometimes interactions are different. And we're a global company, right? And most of the times, I will sometimes there, but there's going to be a lot of times when you're interacting with people from different countries, right, with different cultural expectations, etc. And again, that's obvious, right? But the obvious is easy to miss. Explicit is better than implicit, right? Yes, not only there are cultural differences in play, but also the even more obvious thing that they were trained a different way than you are at platform, right? It's not the same group of people training everyone, even though we share a group of values, right? The specificities of the way we do our jobs and in each of our departments, like the sorts of expectations that are put on us regarding like how should we respond to anyone or which side, etc. Those are all different department by department, right? And I mean, that's just part of our social interactions, and you could argue very strongly that the processes, I mean, if you've never written a document in your life, I mean, another obvious thing, that's not a human, right? That's a piece of paper. That's not even a piece of paper. That's light coming off a screen, right? That's light coming off a screen. You might print it and it might become a piece of paper, right? With some words written on it that are written in this alphabet that we use, but that's not a human, but that still is a part of the way we do things. We reference that constantly. So, this ran out of battery. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to not wreck my voice here. So, when we reference those, that's a non-human that we're interacting with daily to do the very human part of our social interaction. So let's give a more, I'm going to try to give a more simple example here. Actor network theory is useful here because it gives us a framework to understand how all of these elements interact together, right? And these networks include not only humans like customers, teammates, members of other teams, but also non-human elements like the means by which we communicate. For example, if you use Slack versus an email versus a phone call, etc., or in our training processes and our cultural expectations, etc., those are all non-human elements that are present in interactions. No matter if a human produced them, the instant they become something produced, right, they are an external thing. And that external thing is non-human, right? Thank you. No, I see some confused faces. By non-human, I don't mean non-humane, right? It might be humane in the way that it's meant for human consumption or meant for human interaction. That's not what I mean. I mean non-human in the sense that, that's not a human. That's not a person you can talk to. That's a thing. That's something else, right? Easier examples would be like animals and such, or, fungi, which were subject of a book I read recently at university, which is when I realized, hey, am I in the wrong class? Because I'm reading a book about fungi in my anthropology class, but no, it was anthropology, and it wasn't biology or anything. So, yeah, to summarize all of this, right? When you interact with a person, you're also interacting with their training and cultural expectations through some medium of communication that itself carries expectations, and you cannot split these apart. It's a batch deal, right? These elements, it's like bringing all the obvious things to head at once. It's kind of overwhelming at first. It was for me, right? But let's use, for example, this is more support-oriented, but let's see if I can think of other examples, right? When we communicate in Slack versus when we communicate in ZS versus when we communicate in Jira, those are all different mediums, right? And in Slack, you're I mean, you've mentioned it and we've all lived it. Those 200, 300 long message threads where people are just bouncing off ideas off each other. And you're expected to condense that information after the fact, right? If there's a report to be made, you're expected to condense that information after the fact and produce a document or whatever, or create a JIRA if it's a technical issue or something like that. You have to do a translation, right? Because you've changed mediums, right? And that's part of the social interaction that you're having. Like, that's a non-human factor. Like, the medium in which you're communicating is a non-human factor in this network of social interactions. Like, I didn't draw any graphs here, illustrations, because it would probably get too complex, but you can picture it, right? You're talking to other people, right? Perfect humans, in Slack, which is a medium that carries some expectations and some stuff like there's gonna be 200, 300 message long threads. That's fine because it's meant for that, right? And amongst other things. But when you move to a technical document, you're gonna have to trim all the files. Like, you're gonna have to trim all of Sean's gifts off the thread. You're gonna have to trim all of, the points that people give each other. You're gonna have to trim everything off because, while that's cool and good and part of the social interaction, and a technical document, it's not needed. In Zendesk, for example, we were communicating with customers. So not only do we have to have the structure right balance between technical and socially appropriate, in the sense of we have to have a lot of tact when dealing with the customer, right? It's our job as a support team to be empathetic, and it's part of our cultural values at the company, right? We could consider the cultural values on the platform like a subcultural thing, right? Because yes, while we do have while we do have our cultural backgrounds from the way we were raised, etc., the countries we were born in, when you arrive at a platform station, when you join a team, you have to learn a second culture the same way you would learn a second language, right? A lot of people here aren't from an English-speaking country, so that must make sense, right? I'm Brazilian. This is my second language right now, so I had to learn this. And at platform, I had to learn a second culture. But the thing is, it's not just second cultures. That's the big jump. It's not just you're not just learning a second culture, you're learning a bunch of different cultures and expectations within platformization. And it's not just platformization, right? When you start studying anthropology, each place you go, it becomes like this, it's a revelation, oh my God, people here eat with a knife and fork. So do I. But I had to take a 17-hour trip to get here, right? That's not something to just wave away. That's significant. The fact that us in such different places, even though it's Latin America, we share the same custom, right, of eating with a knife and fork. But if you go to some Asian countries, for example, some of them use chopsticks, right? But not for every meal. That's the thing, not for every meal. Japanese people, for example, they eat rice with a spoon. Sometimes, most times rather. And sometimes they eat rice with chopsticks, depending on the type of rice. It's the more sticky one, you eat rice with the chopsticks. And some people eat food with their hands, right? In Brazil, I had a friend who was telling me, when we gave this example, because this is again, the most obvious thing you can think of, food, right? She was telling me that her grandma used to eat with her hands, right? Her grandma was 19 years old or something, and she hasn't eaten her whole life using her hands. And that's like, oh, that's cool. Like, it's been a custom here for however many decades or centuries, right? But I mean, people sometimes still eat with their hands. But yeah, that's just one example. Like everywhere we go, and then that applies also to the digital channel you're in. Like if you're on Slack, if you go to don't, for example, this is something that everyone here will know. Don't start a conversation in the instance channel, for example, because very soon Nicola or Florian will be like, hey, please don't talk here because we've set up a channel to ping us, even in our offline times, right? That's like a norm that's enforced, and like that's, even though it's enforced within a certain space, even though the space is digital, it's a norm within a space, right? That's the sort of example that I mean as well. How much time do I have left?
Like 8 minutes.
8 minutes, okay. So I'm gonna wrap up and I'm gonna open up for questions in case you have any. Yeah, so I'm hoping that these sorts of, this talk was, it was probably clickbait. I realized that because the talk title was Communicating Effectively. And I didn't give you any action points, whatever, but I wanted to talk about the theory and the sorts of ways in which we think about this, in which we can think about this, right? To extract the non-obvious from the obvious, right? Because again, that's the sort of mantra that I want to keep repeating. The obvious is sometimes the easiest to miss. Explicit is better than implicit. And, you know, it's wonderful. To me, it's been like a greatly rewarding experience to be able to just notice these sorts of small things. Let me see if I can think of any more examples. I guess I could hand it off to y'all. Does anyone want to give examples of these sorts of things that you noticed that were like, oh wow, this person does things differently. This is the sort of moment that you like. It's called, I forgot how it's called in English, but when you find something strange, pause and think that for a second, right? Because strange, like everybody goes through this. Everybody finds something strange at one point or another. At maybe different times, right? And when you do that next, pause and think for a moment and think about that. So, okay.
We're actually talking about this. About one example of this the other night. Specifically, Adobe phone calls. They differ very greatly depending on who's in them. In terms of what you're willing to say, you know, what you can say, what you can't say, what kind of communication style is expected. You know, if we're dealing with just the support and support adjacent people, internal audit we call, what we can say is much more technical. We can be much more frank with our communication. We don't really have to be as guarded about what we say. For example, it's just us and Geetha in a call. Or us and Robin in a call, we say what we think, pretty much. We can tell it exactly how it is, and get to the point quickly, because we're not, we're not worrying about who's offended, who's going to take it the wrong way. We know we're on the same team. We know we're on the same team. We know what we want to get out of this call. And we want to get, the customer happy as fast as possible. And it's really like as you get like higher and higher up, people from, and even when you get like developers from a client on the call, you're still like talking to the developer mode. If you start getting C-level people, you start getting higher, like anybody higher than Shane on the Adobe side in the US time zone. So you gotta, lower the technical level, you've got to actually stop and think, is what I'm saying going to be used against me? Because, is what I'm saying going to create more questions?
I'm going to reword what you said. Like, you always got to think, do my actions have consequences? Right? That's the first step. You got to think, depending on who you're talking to, you got to think for a second, do my actions have consequences? And the answer is always probably yes. Your actions have consequences. And then you move to the second question. Which consequences does my action have? And then you think about what you're going to say, if it's worth saying or not. And then, things go wild from there. But I'm going to mention an example because you mentioned the language. Funny thing that happened yesterday. As some of you were following, and as I mentioned at the start of the talk, I was dealing with, I'm migrating from my old laptop to my new work laptop, and yesterday we spent quite a few hours on this. It was a huge challenge. And then I was sitting next to Bill, and I described the situation with some very non-PG-13 words, which I'm not going to reply here, or say again here, but Bill said, "Oh, I love it when you use technical terms." And the funny thing is, they are, even if they're not PG-13 words, if I was using them in a very specific way, that meant something. You understood what I meant. Everybody who worked in tech knew exactly what I meant, but it's non-PG-13 words, so go back to language games. I was doing the completely on my computer language game, not the cursing someone out language game. Anyway. Does anyone else have any examples that they want to talk about this sort of feeling of having lived through a strange experience?
Sure. Hi everyone. So if you can't remember, I'm on the accounts team, so if you're on support and you haven't talked to me, thank you for your patience. I think one of the things, maybe not more of an example, but more of something that brings me down when I get frustrated about communication is remembering that we're all trying to reach the same goal. Like, this is a company, we're all trying to make sure the company is successful and working, and thus that we get paid at the end of the day. And I think that really helps me feel a lot less frustrated when I feel like I'm hitting one of these roadblocks where I'm like, I don't know what the goal is here. What is this person trying to solve? Yeah, and then sometimes going back to the source, a more specific example is if somebody has a Zendesk request and they ask me something, I'm like, oh no, I'm not really sure what they're asking me. Maybe just go to the Zendesk ticket and see what the customer is asking is a great way to kind of demystify when people are trying to summarize for you, which is amazing. I get that you're trying to help, but sometimes as humans we err, and it's nice to be able to get that information. So yeah, we're all on the same goal, we're all on the same team, and that's pretty much all I would say. And great talk, by the way, I really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much. All right, so yeah, we're almost all the time now, so I just want to say thank you. There were many other things which I wanted to talk about, but that's going to have to be for another day. So yeah, thank you very much.
Did anybody lose their glasses in the glasses?